My sister Carol and I grew up on this street. Nothing left but part of the driveway now. I don't think our front door was ever locked. We had the best time. Carol was the first to get married. I thought they'd been married forever, but something changed along the way. For the longest time, I had no idea her husband was hurting her.
People still sometimes feel like, oh, domestic violence, I don't know anybody that is involved with that. There's never been anybody that I've ever known. But what I'm here to tell you is it is, and they are, and they're your neighbors and your coworkers and your church members. That's the whole thing about domestic violence is we don't know what goes on in people's homes. I have also seen people come in support of people who were charged and say, oh, he's such a nice guy, he's such a great father, he couldn't possibly have done this. Unless you are in a relationship with that person, you have no idea what they're capable of.
Looking back, I think the signs were there. I just didn't recognize them. I believed what she was telling me. She had an accident. She was tired, didn't want to go out.
In a relationship, it's not always bad. If it were always bad, people would get out very quickly. There's generally a honeymoon phase where, there can be promises made, gifts given, lovely experiences, dates, things like that. And then eventually you move into the tension building phase where the offender might become short with someone, might get irritated. You can just tell that this person is starting to get angry and that eventually there is going to be an explosion, basically.
There's coercion, there's threats, there's intimidation, there's sex assault, there's economic abuse.
There's always accusations of cheating and not loving the abuser. So that really wears down on a victim, and to the point that when finally the physical abuse starts, they just, unfortunately, their self-esteem and their strength has dwindled.
And then you move right back into the honeymoon phase after that explosion, where now it's apologies, more promises made, gifts, things like that.
Of course, the $64,000 question when it comes to domestic violence is, why don't these victims leave these abusive relationships? And there's a myriad of reasons why you don't just get up and leave a relationship that you've been in, especially if it's a long-term relationship, if you're married, if there's children, if you own a home together. They may not have a job, they may not have job skills, they may not have transportation. It seems insurmountable to them, and it's not uncommon for them to just stay where they are out of fear.
He was arrested at one point. Neighbors had to call the police. I just wish I could have done something to stop it. I guess it was just hard to get help back then.
The realities of violence against women up until the mid-70s was, these were just like every other crimes. They were incident-based crimes. So we trained police throughout the country to deal with domestic violence as an incident-based incident. Like, in other words, Bill broke into Joe's house and stole his television, you charge him with burglary, next case. We were pushing away the history and the context.
That court was scary, but I went down there to be with her. At that hearing, she just seemed like a different person.
Clients were having to wait in the courtroom for their case to be heard. On top of that, you have the offender sitting nearby you, or maybe even sitting right next to you, or the offender's family. And they might even be verbally intimidating you, or threatening you. You need to leave, you need to get out of here. If you follow through with this, I'm going to do this, this, and this. So that adds an additional component of fear.
When I first started helping with orders of protection. A lot of the cases were being heard in a little courtroom in the Criminal Justice Center, and it was full. I would get the forms and take the victim to my car, and we would complete the petition and take it back to the commissioner to get it approved. In those days, the petition was about 12 pages long, and if you didn't understand the language, more than likely your petition was not going to be approved. So it was difficult.
We heard victims tell us that the judge asked, "What did you say to him to make him hit you?" We heard victims say they had a spiritual crisis that they couldn't report because of their clergy member saying you should be more subservient, go home and pray. It was a complete shutdown of the system. The system was working for the people in the system, but it didn't work for the victim.
I got the feeling that was the last straw for her. She and the kids had to get out of there.
When a victim finally makes that decision that they're going to leave whatever scenario they're in, when they finally make that decision, it's a big one. I couldn't imagine, and I don't think very many people can, that if you were to drop everything, your job, your school, your home, your family, how disruptive, how challenging, how scary that would be for anyone to do.
The most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when they finally decide to leave the relationship, because it's all about the power and control dynamic. And when the person who is trying to maintain control in the relationship realizes that they're losing control and that the person is leaving, they become very desperate.
I loved Carol so much. I looked up to her ever since we were little girls. I never saw her alive again. He killed her.
There's always tremendous risk in these cases. In many of them, it is life or death. And it is so important for prosecutors and the people involved with victims to realize this and appreciate that fact.
Everybody realized that these issues were not women's issues, they weren't family issues, they were criminal issues that needed to be dealt with in the criminal justice system as a whole.
We realized that we had to draw a contextual picture of the crime. That language, that fear, that intimidation, all the things that you saw that was going on inside that home, and document it and bring it before the courts and the juries and the community to say, this is much bigger than you know.
Andrea Conte, who was the wife of the mayor at the time, Mayor Bredesen, who was later Governor Bredesen, she was assaulted. And the man who assaulted her and she fought and got away from him, he was later involved in the murder of another woman before he was apprehended. She became a big victims advocate, and she had the ear of the mayor and the chief of police when it came to innovating different types of programs for victims and for domestic violence.
Chief Kirshner and the mayor created our domestic violence division, which at the time was the largest in the United States. Over 30 personnel, captain, lieutenant, 3 sergeants, 20 detectives. We started looking at these cases differently. We looked at, interview techniques and evidence presentations to prosecution and, repeat offenders, which a 30-year calls are repeats. That changed our philosophy. And by the way, when we did that, there were already people in the community that were just waiting. It was like, oh, now you're awake.
About 93 or 94, there was a case that came before the court where a gentleman was on probation out of one of our courts for mistreating his wife. And he had beat his wife, knocked her down in the middle of the street, doused her with lighter fluid, and I revoked his probation and locked him up in jail. And a whisper went out over the courthouse that someone went to jail for domestic violence.
We had the domestic violence prosecution team at the DA's office, and from the end of the 90s into the 2000s, there was a huge focus. I mean, Nashville was nationally and internationally known for the services provided to domestic violence victims, the collaboration between nonprofit organizations. The Nashville Coalition Against Domestic Violence was in full gear. So people were talking and collaborating and working together and tackling this issue like never before.
It takes years to build good practices, and it takes days to change it all and to tear it all down. All it takes is one decision that we're going to do one thing differently. That's when everything unravels and victims are put at risk.
As the structure of the courts began to change, it was a little bit more of a struggle to maintain the collaboration.
At the end of 2003, the legislature had added 2 more divisions of criminal court, but did not provide the funding to staff those courts. It was devastating to have these amazing, dedicated, trained, caring domestic violence prosecutors be moved out of our division and then not have them.
People lost funding, budgets changed, mayors changed, just people had different interests. Outreach advocates for shelters got cut down to 1 or 2 people. It was a hard time for us that were long-term advocates in the system to see things kind of unravel right in front of us.
Across the board, across the system, services went downhill. And it was very frustrating.
You knew people weren't reporting because you knew they didn't feel supported. You knew that people were in danger.
You did wonder sometimes, what's it going to take for people to see, wow, we don't have what we had. We're not doing what we were doing. And is it going to take someone losing their life to bring the attention back to, hey, Nashville, what are we doing? What happened?
I don't think I'll ever understand. Through the years, I've come to terms with it, but it was difficult for my mother and father.
There was a point when I was working in Mayor Carl Dean's office that some community leaders came and said, we need to look very critically at ourselves and see where we can do better and improve victim safety and improve offender accountability.
We looked at everything from 911 all the way through probation. So we looked at the whole system. We did court watch. We sat in night court. We watched judges. We did police ride-alongs. We went with the sheriff's department to serve orders of protections. We did a really deep dive into what was happening in Nashville. That report came out in 2013 and had about 55 recommendations of how we can improve our services to domestic violence victims and holding offenders accountable.
Everyone in the city got behind the assessment. The mayor, the police chief, the district attorney, the sheriff, the judges, they all stood behind the mayor as we as a city made a commitment to move forward on these recommendations.
The DA's office added more prosecutors to their division. The domestic violence division shored back up and I think has 20 detectives now. So we've seen our services grow as a result of that. Nashville's gotten lots of federal funding. We've hired lots of staff.
One of the first recommendations that we moved forward on was to improve what happens when you go to court on a domestic violence case and created the Jean Crow Advocacy Center.
We are a safe space for victims of domestic violence, so these people who are in fear and are scared for their lives don't have to sit right next to this defendant or their mom or their friend or their sister or so on and so forth. It gives them somewhere where they can talk with DAs safely, they can meet with advocates safely, and they don't have to sit in the courtroom if they don't want to. We'll sit with them, we'll chat with them. We want to know about their lives and them because they're people and they're important, and we want them to know that we care about them and their lives. We do our best to make sure they're as comfortable as possible for each and every person that comes in here. We do see clients that are literally in life or death situations. We also see child abuse, we see sexual assault, we see the whole range. We see trafficking, human trafficking. We see a whole range of people. Every race, every religion, every sexuality, we see it all. We see the richest people, famous people, to homeless people. As someone who lives in Nashville, who's worked in this field for years, I am so grateful that Jean Crow Advocacy Center exists.
Our mayor, Carl Dean, did one of the most intelligent things that I think a mayor could do. And he made the Department of Family Safety an actual department with the metropolitan government. And as we all know, when we're dealing with governments, it's hard to get rid of a department.
So institutionalizing our work, making sure it lasts, was a #1 priority. And Nashville is the only city in the country that decided to do that by creating a standalone department whose mission is improving domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, victim safety, and offender accountability. What we know is that the vast majority of domestic violence homicides happen to victims that are not engaged with our law enforcement and our court systems. And so it's essential that we have a family safety center out in the community. So victims can come to us, it's free, it's confidential, there's parking, and have a way to meet with an advocate or meet with their counselor that is convenient to them.
It used to be that they might have to go to the police department, and then they might have to go downtown to see the magistrate, and then they may have to go to the shelter, and then they may have to go to a counselor. So that was a challenge. And now that we have everything under one roof, they have one place that they can come to, and they can interact with folks from a lot of different agencies, and they can get all the different things that they need in one spot.
One of the great outcomes of doing the assessment, of auditing how we do things, is that it really started to reinsert hope for the people that do this work. Hope that things will get better, hope that actually the system cares and leaders in our community care.
The thing I'm most excited about is what happens next. This crime's not going away. We've got a lot of generations of work to do, but it's easier to hold these offenders accountable when the community stands in front of the victim.
Nashville is different now. People who are afraid, being abused, have a chance to survive, find hope. That's a wonderful thing.
What I know about the domestic violence movement in Nashville is that it did not happen overnight. It took a lot of different people with a lot of different concerns coming together to make a difference.
The need to keep the energy behind prosecuting and helping victims of domestic violence is one where we have to be vigilant every single day with every single case. I think that once we stop communicating with each other, that being the police, the judges, the probation officers, advocates, the DA's office, then we are back to where we were.
My grandfather was a very important person in my life. He talked with me a lot about how you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. And I like to see people take these positions with domestic violence programs who have a heart for the work. And I would just say to them, don't ever drop the ball, don't give up. Keep going.
It feels like this should be the standard, and that every community has a family safety center or a Jean Crow Advocacy Center. I can't imagine what going through this would have been like if these buildings and the staff here didn't exist.
The message is, don't get complacent. Don't think that because we have this amazing building and all this attention right now and people on board, that is going to just stay forever. It takes work. It takes commitment. It takes commitment to individuals. It takes commitment to the other agencies. You have to communicate. You have to work together, and you have to make an effort every single day.
A domestic violence murder is the only murder that can be prevented. And I hope that there'll be a day where we will not see anyone lose their lives because of violence in the home.
That generation you saw at the ribbon cutting, 30 years from now, they're going to be sitting here talking to another interviewer and saying, what happened, what did you do? And they're going to say, we don't have domestic murder in Nashville anymore. That's possible because of what's happening today.
Having domestic violence homicides year after year, having women get killed in front of their children, having this amount of tragedy is just not acceptable for a community to allow. We have got to get to the place where no one is getting killed. And then after we get to that place, we're going to work on no one's getting severely hurt, and then we'll work on that abuse doesn't happen in your home and that women and children are safe.